January 1945. The Hürtgen Forest, Western Germany. The snow has stopped falling, but the cold remains. It settles into bark, cloth, metal. Somewhere beneath the trees, a German sniper lies motionless, pressed into the forest floor. He has not shifted his weight since dawn. His rifle, wood darkened by oil and use, rests against a fallen log. The scope lens is clear. His breath is slow, measured, almost absent. Hours pass without movement. No shots, no voices. Only the distant thud of artillery far beyond the trees, muted by thick trunks and frozen ground. The sniper waits because waiting is the weapon. Movement is death here. He watches a narrow corridor between pines where American patrols have crossed before. He has chosen this place carefully. Behind him, the forest does not change. It holds its shape. It holds its silence. What the sniper cannot see is not in front of him. It is low to the ground, moving inches at a time. An American scout detail, trained to hunt stillness itself, has been circling for hours, reading crushed needles, disturbed snow, the absence of sound where sound should exist. The war, in this forest, has narrowed to a few square meters of earth, and the balance between hunter and hunted is about to shift. By the winter of 1944 to 1945, the war in Western Europe had entered a brutal, grinding phase. The Allied breakout from Normandy the previous summer had promised speed and momentum. Paris had been liberated. German forces had fallen back across France and Belgium. But by autumn, the advance slowed. Supply lines stretched thin, weather closed in, and in the borderlands of Western Germany, the terrain itself began to fight. The Hürtgen Forest lay south of Aachen, straddling the German-Belgian border. It was not a place meant for rapid maneuver. Dense conifer trees blocked sight lines to a few meters. Steep ravines cut movement into predictable paths. The ground, once wet, turned into frozen ruts that echoed under careless boots. For the U.S. First Army, ordered to secure the region in late 1944, the forest became a trap of attrition rather than a gateway into Germany. German commanders understood this. After the collapse in France, the Wehrmacht no longer possessed the manpower or fuel to meet the Allies in open battle. Defensive doctrine shifted toward delay, disruption, and psychological exhaustion. Forests, villages, and ridgelines were used to bleed advancing units without committing large formations. Small, well-hidden elements, machine gun teams, artillery observers, and snipers were tasked with slowing progress one patrol at a time. Snipers, in particular, played a specific role in this strategy. Contrary to popular myth, they were not lone hunters roaming freely. They were integrated into defensive systems. Their purpose was not high body counts, but control of space. A single unseen rifle could freeze an entire platoon in place. Roads went unused. Trails became forbidden. Medical evacuation slowed. Fear multiplied faster than casualties. German sniper training before and during the war emphasized patience above all else. Many were drawn from hunting backgrounds or specially selected infantrymen. They were taught to observe longer than they shot, to lie still through cold, insects, and fear, to become part of the ground itself. In the forests of the Western Front, this doctrine found ideal conditions. American forces faced a different challenge. The U.S. Army entered the war with less emphasis on sniper specialization. While marksmanship was valued, dedicated sniper schools expanded only after combat experience revealed the threat posed by German and Soviet snipers. By late 1944, U.S. divisions had begun to adapt. Infantry units increasingly relied on scouts, soldiers trained to move ahead of the main force, reading terrain, identifying ambushes, and locating concealed enemy positions. These scouts did not hunt glory. Their role was quiet and dangerous. They moved without firing, often without speaking. Their success was measured in paths cleared, dangers avoided, and lives saved behind them. In places like the Hürtgen Forest, where visibility was measured in steps rather than meters, the contest between sniper and scout became a war within the war, unrecorded in headlines, but decisive on the ground. And it is within this environment, frozen, claustrophobic, and unforgiving, that one such encounter took shape, defined not by speed or firepower, but by endurance. The men who fought in the Hürtgen Forest carried very different training into the same narrow spaces. On one side were German snipers, shaped by a military culture that had long valued fieldcraft and marksmanship. On the other were American scouts, product of an army that learned by adapting under fire. German sniper instruction, formalized before the war and refined through years of combat, emphasized concealment over engagement. Snipers were taught to fire as little as possible. A missed shot could reveal position. Even a successful kill invited retaliation. Many were instructed to remain in place for entire days, sometimes longer, without firing at all if the tactical situation did not demand it. Their presence alone was meant to shape enemy behavior. Equipment supported this doctrine. The Carabiner 98K rifle, paired with optical sights such as a ZF-39 or earlier ZF-41, offered precision rather than volume. The rifle's bolt-action mechanism discouraged rapid firing, reinforcing discipline. Camouflage smocks, when available, were designed to break up the human outline in forested terrain. Helmets were often covered, faces darkened, rifles wrapped in cloth to dull reflections. Every detail served the same goal: remain unseen. American scouts approached the forest differently. They were not usually equipped with scope rifles. Many carried M1 Garand rifles or M1 carbines, lighter, faster to handle, but louder and less precise at long range. Their advantage lay in movement, coordination, and observation. Scout training stressed reading terrain for signs of occupation, broken branches, disturbed soil, unnatural stillness. In winter conditions, snow told its own story. A single compressed patch could indicate hours of human presence. By late 1944, U.S. units had learned painful lessons. Casualties inflicted by unseen snipers forced changes in behavior. Patrols began to avoid predictable routes. Scouts moved in pairs or small elements, advancing in staggered patterns rather than straight lines. They learned to listen not just for sound, but for its absence. In the forest, silence could be deliberate. The environment amplified every mistake. Cold stiffened muscles. Frostbite reduced sensitivity in fingers, making fine movements harder. Breathing had to be controlled to avoid visible vapor. Sound traveled unpredictably through trees and ravines. A snapped twig could carry far. So could a whispered warning, if carelessly given. For a sniper lying in wait, these conditions demanded endurance bordering on cruelty. Remaining motionless for hours meant pain, numbness, and vulnerability. Shifting position risked detection. Relieving oneself was often impossible. Many snipers later described the psychological strain as greater than the physical, knowing that discovery would not mean a firefight, but sudden death. For scouts, the danger was no less intense. They moved knowing that any step could place them in the center of an unseen rifle's field of view. Yet they were trained to press forward, because hesitation could stall entire operations. In the Hurtgen forest, progress was measured in yards per day. A single sniper could cost dozens of lives if left undetected. These opposing methods, absolute stillness versus deliberate movement, created moments of terrifying intimacy. Encounters were not always decided by fire, but by awareness, by who noticed the smallest irregularity first. From this tension emerged multiple perspectives on the same deadly contest, each revealing a different truth about how men fought, survived, and endured in the frozen forests of Western Germany. For the German sniper, the forest was not a backdrop. It was a test of will. Hours passed without relief, without confirmation that his presence mattered. His world narrowed to the space beneath his chest and the narrow cone of vision through his scope. Hunger was ignored. Cold was managed, not defeated. Pain became static, something acknowledged, then pushed aside. German field manuals described the ideal sniper as invisible not only to the enemy, but to time itself. Remaining still for an entire day was not exceptional. It was expected. Yet this endurance carried a cost. Muscles cramped. Circulation slowed. Judgment dulled. The longer a sniper remained fixed, the more difficult it became to react if the situation changed. Stillness, once an advantage, could become a trap. Across the same ground, American scouts experienced a different strain. They moved slowly, but movement itself was exhausting. Every step required decision. Where to place a boot. How to shift weight without noise. When to freeze completely and listen. Their fear was active rather than static. They anticipated sudden violence, knowing it would arrive without warning. Both sides were isolated. Neither could rely on immediate support. Survival depended not on strength, but on restraint. Tactical angle, control of space. Tactically, the sniper's role was to deny terrain. A single rifle, properly placed, could close an entire corridor. In forests like Hurtgen, where movement was already restricted, this effect multiplied. American units learned to treat certain paths as contaminated, areas entered only after deliberate clearing. Scouts were the answer to this threat. Their mission was not to engage unless necessary. It was to confirm or deny danger. They advanced ahead of main elements, sometimes within meters of concealed enemy positions, attempting to draw no attention at all. When a sniper was suspected, scouts did not rush forward. They circled. They waited. They observed patterns, where fire had come from before, where it had not. This created a tactical standoff. The sniper depended on the enemy exposing themselves. The scouts depended on the sniper making a mistake. Technological angle, tools that shape behavior. Weapons influence decisions. The German sniper's bolt-action rifle demanded commitment. Each shot required manual cycling, momentarily breaking visual contact. This reinforced the doctrine of firing only when success was certain. Optics provided clarity, but also narrowed awareness. Tunnel vision was a known risk. American scouts relied less on optics and more on peripheral awareness. Their semi-automatic rifles allowed rapid response, but they avoided firing whenever possible. Noise drew attention. Fire invited artillery. Silence preserved options. Technology did not determine outcomes alone. It shaped how long men waited, how cautiously they moved, and how quickly situations could turn irreversible. These angles, human, tactical, and technological, intersected constantly in the forest. But other forces were at work as well. Leadership decisions, perceptions of the enemy, and moral boundaries all pressing on the moment that was quietly approaching. Command decisions in the Hurtgen forest were often made without clear information. Battalion and company commanders relied on fragmented reports, delayed messages, estimated enemy positions, and the absence of movement where movement was expected. In such conditions, leadership became an exercise in risk management rather than control. German officers understood that their forces could not hold ground indefinitely. Orders emphasized delay. Snipers were positioned not to win battles, but to buy hours. Each hour slowed the American timetable. Each force pause allowed German units to reorganize, reposition artillery, or prepare the next offensive line. Snipers were rarely told how long they would remain in place. The assumption was simple, until ordered otherwise, or until discovered. American leadership faced a different calculus. Pressure came from above to maintain momentum. Forest fighting, however, resisted speed. Commanders increasingly empowered small unit leaders, sergeants, lieutenants, scout team leaders, to make decisions on the ground. This decentralization allowed adaptation, but it also placed immense responsibility on individuals operating far ahead of support. A scout's decision to halt, D2, or close with a suspected sniper could affect an entire company's movement that day. Enemy angle, mutual recognition. Despite the violence, there existed a grim respect between opponents. German snipers were aware of American adaptability. They knew that repeated fire from the same position invited countermeasures. American scouts, in turn, learned to respect the patience and skill of German marksmen. After-action reports often described sniper engagements with a tone of caution rather than bravado. The enemy was not abstract. He was imagined lying just beyond sight, enduring the same cold, listening to the same wind. This recognition did not soften intent, but it sharpened awareness. Underestimating the opponent in such terrain was fatal. Moral angle, killing at close distance. Sniping removed the chaos of battle and replaced it with intimacy. Targets were observed before engagement. Movements were studied. Sometimes a decision not to fire carried as much weight as a decision to shoot. German doctrine discouraged unnecessary killing, not from mercy, but from pragmatism. Every shot risked exposure. For American scouts, closing on a sniper presented its own moral tension. Discovery often led to immediate lethal force. There was rarely time for surrender. Encounters ended quickly and quietly. The forest absorbed the outcome without witness. These moral boundaries were shaped by necessity. Neither side fought for spectacle. They fought to survive the next hour. As leadership intent enemy perception, and moral restraint converged, the conditions for a decisive moment were set. Somewhere in the forest, a sniper remained still, unaware that the balance he relied upon had already begun to tilt. By mid-morning, the forest had settled into a deceptive calm. The German sniper had been in position since before first light. His body heat had long since seeped into the frozen ground beneath him. What remained was discipline. He had chosen his hide with care, downwind of likely American movement, angled to avoid silhouetting against the pale winter sky. A fallen tree masked his outline. Snow lightly dusted his camouflage, further erasing him from the landscape. Through his scope, the world was a narrow corridor of trunks and shadow. He had already watched one American patrol pass at a distance earlier in the day. They had moved cautiously, but not cautiously enough to warrant a shot. The risk of exposure outweighed the gain. His orders were clear: delay, disrupt, remain unseen. What he could not know was that American units operating in this sector had altered their approach. Repeated losses to snipers had forced a shift in behavior. Scouts were no longer simply moving ahead of the main force. They were actively hunting positions like his. The scout element moved without a timetable. 2 men advanced while others remained still, then roles reversed. They avoided the obvious trails. They favored ground that offered concealment rather than speed. Each man scanned not for movement, but for unnatural absence, areas where birds did not land, where snow lay undisturbed too long, where branches formed lines too deliberate to be accidental. The forest assisted both sides and betrayed both sides. A gust of wind stirred the canopy, masking small sounds. Far off artillery created a low, irregular thunder that blurred quieter noise. But the same wind shifted snow, revealing depressions. The same artillery vibrations carried through the ground. At some point, without any signal, the geometry of the encounter changed. The sniper's chosen field of fire narrowed further as the scouts moved beyond his frontal arc. His advantage, observation, became fixed in a single direction. Behind him, unseen, the forest was no longer empty. The scouts had not spotted him yet, but they had sensed something wrong. A patch of snow disturbed in a way that did not match animal movement. A fallen branch angled too deliberately. They slowed further. They spread. The sniper remained still. He trusted his concealment. He trusted his patience. But patience, in a shifting battlefield, has limits, and the final minutes before discovery are often silent, stretched thin by the weight of irreversible consequence. The moment did not announce itself. There was no sudden noise, no shouted warning, no exchange fire. It arrived as a change in awareness. One of the American scouts had moved far enough to the flank that the forest no longer aligned with the sniper's expectations. From this angle, concealment looked different. The fallen log that masked the rifle barrel created a straight line that nature rarely produced. Snow had gathered unevenly along its edge, compressed in a way that suggested weight rather than wind. The scout did not raise his weapon. He did not rush forward. He froze. Training took over. The second scout adjusted position, slowly, deliberately, widening the arc. Neither man spoke. Sound was the final boundary they would not cross. The German sniper sensed nothing. His breathing remained controlled, his attention fixed downrange. Years of training had conditioned him to ignore discomfort, to resist the urge to skin unnecessarily. To turn now, to look behind, would mean movement. Movement meant detection. The distance closed to a matter of feet. At this range, optics were irrelevant. Rifles were no longer tools of precision, but weight and leverage. The forest, which had concealed the sniper for hours, now concealed the men behind him. The whisper, recorded later only as a brief note in an after-action report, was not dramatic. It was functional, a signal delivered at close range, intended to prevent noise rather than create it. The sniper's body reacted before his mind could process what had changed. Muscles tensed. Weight shifted. It was too late. The engagement lasted seconds, not minutes. There was no exchange of fire, no warning shot. The outcome was decisive because surprise had reversed. The sniper, who had owned the space through stillness, was now trapped by it. When it was over, the forest returned to its previous state. Snow fell from disturbed branches. The low artillery thunder continued somewhere beyond the trees. The scouts remained still for several moments longer, listening for response that did not come. One man lay where he had waited all day. Another stood, breathing carefully, aware that survival had depended not on strength or speed, but on who noticed the smallest detail first. This single encounter did not change the war, but its consequences rippled outward, through patrol behavior, unit reports, and a quiet recalibration of fear on both sides of the line. The immediate aftermath of the encounter was not marked by celebration or pause. In the Hurtgen Forest, survival demanded momentum. The American scouts did not linger longer than necessary. Once the area was cleared and no secondary positions were detected, they signaled for the main element to advance. The path the sniper had controlled for hours was now open, not because it was safe, but because the immediate threat had been removed. Unit reports later reflected the encounter in sparse language. Snipers were noted as neutralized. Locations were marked. No elaboration followed. This was common. Small-scale actions rarely received detailed narrative unless they resulted in unusually high casualties or strategic shifts. Yet within those brief lines, lessons were embedded. American infantry units moving through similar terrain adjusted spacing and tempo. The confirmation that scouts could outmaneuver even well-concealed snipers reinforced the importance of patience and methodical movement. Leaders emphasized flanking approaches and the value of silence over speed. These changes were not formal doctrine revisions, but field adaptations passed quietly between units. For German forces, the loss of a sniper was more than a single casualty. Snipers required time to train and deploy. Their effectiveness relied on familiarity with terrain. When one position went silent, it created uncertainty. Was the area compromised? Had American counter-sniper tactics improved? German defensive elements often responded by shifting positions, reducing time spent in any single hide. The forest itself bore the evidence. Disturbed snow, broken branches, and tracks, subtle, easily erased, marked where the balance had tipped. Within days, artillery fire and continued movement would erase most signs. But for the men who passed through afterward, awareness lingered. The sense that stillness could conceal danger or signal its removal shaped every step. Casualty numbers from the Hurtgen campaign underscored the cost of such encounters multiplied across weeks. Tens of thousands of American casualties were recorded, many from small unit actions rather than large engagements. German losses, while lower in number, carried disproportionate impact due to limited reserves. This encounter, like many others, contributed incrementally to exhaustion on both sides. It was one thread in a larger pattern of attrition that defined the forest fighting. The consequences did not end at the tree line. They carried forward into planning, training, and memory, quietly influencing how future patrols would move, pause, and listen. As the weeks passed, the cumulative effect of countless small encounters began to reshape operations in the forest. American units increasingly treated snipers not as isolated threats, but as integral component of German defensive systems. Patrols were planned with counter-sniper movement in mind from the outset. Scouts were given more autonomy, trusted to slow the advance if caution demanded it. Silence became a form of coordination. German forces, facing growing pressure and diminishing resources, adjusted as well. Defensive doctrine emphasized shorter occupation times for sniper positions. Shooters were encouraged to relocate frequently, even if that meant abandoning carefully prepared hides. The risk of being flanked by patient reconnaissance elements had become too great to ignore. Psychologically, the toll was heavy. Veterans later described the forest as a place where tension never fully released. Even in moments of rest, attention remained sharpened. The knowledge that death could come without warning, whether from a hidden rifle or a silent approach from behind, eroded any sense of safety. Sleep was shallow. Trust in terrain was fragile. The Hurtgen Forest did not deliver a decisive victory for either side. It consumed men, time, and morale. Yet it forced adaptation. The American army emerged from the campaign with a deeper understanding of reconnaissance, counter-sniper tactics, and the necessity of patience in restrictive terrain. These lessons carried forward into later operations across Germany. For German soldiers, particularly those trained in specialized roles like sniping, the forest represented the limits of endurance. Skill and discipline could delay the enemy, but not stop the broader advance. The defensive strategy bought time, but time itself was running out. Reports, letters, and post-war analyses would later reflect on these fights as emblematic of a certain kind of warfare, intimate, exhausting, and unforgiving, not defined by sweeping maneuvers, but by men lying still in the cold, waiting for hours, hoping to be more aware than the ones searching for them. As the front lines eventually moved eastward and the forest fell behind them, its lessons remained. They settled into training manuals, veteran memory, and the unspoken understanding shared by those who had survived. From this accumulation of experience emerges a broader reflection, one that reaches beyond tactics and terrain, into the nature of modern warfare itself. The war in the Hurtgen Forest was never about dramatic breakthroughs or sweeping advances. It was about endurance, about the quiet mathematics of risk and restraint. In places where visibility collapsed and movement invited death, victory belonged not to the fastest or the strongest, but to those who could wait, observe, and endure uncertainty. The encounter between a German sniper and American scouts reflect a broader truth of the Second World War. Technology mattered, leadership mattered, but at the sharpest edge of combat, outcomes were decided by individual awareness, by men trained to notice what did not belong, a straight line where none should exist, a silence that carried intention. Sniper warfare stripped combat down to its most intimate form. It removed distance, even when the rifle extended reach. It forced soldiers to confront the human presence on the other side of the scope, or just beyond the edge of vision. In doing so, it revealed the psychological weight of modern war, where killing could occur without confrontation, and survival depended on controlling fear as much as terrain. The Hurtgen Forest stands as a reminder that history is not shaped only by generals and grand strategies. It is shaped by moments that never reached headlines, by scouts who moved inches at a time, by snipers who waited all day and never fired, by choices made in silence, measured in heartbeats rather than orders. When the war ended, the forest remained. Trees grew over fighting positions. Snow fell where men once lay still for hours. What endured were the lessons about patience, adaptation, and the cost of seeing without being seen. In that frozen ground, the Second World War revealed one of its enduring truths, that in modern conflict, the smallest moments can carry the heaviest weight, and silence itself can decide who walks away.